Devotional Sentiment and Neohumanism. And it offers this amazing roadmap to finding our balance again.
Yeah, so the material originates from a Prout Now study circle reading. And what makes it so compelling, I think, is that it approaches this modern feeling of burnout not as a personal psychological flaw.
Right, it's not just you being broken.
Exactly. It's framed as a broad philosophical mismatch. We're going to examine the clash between your inner rhythm and the outer world, and how expanding your definition of love is actually the mechanical key to fixing it.
And look, I promise you, we are keeping this completely accessible today. No heavy academic jargon. We're just hitting the core ideas.
Because these ideas are incredibly practical.
They really are. And this material will challenge how you view literally everything. From patriotism to the groups you identify with, right down to the food on your dinner plate.
It definitely goes there.
It does. So, okay, let's unpack this. The foundation of this whole framework starts with the concepts of existential awareness and an inner psychic rhythm. So what does a baseline inner rhythm actually look like?
Well, think of your inner psychic movement as the natural tempo of your consciousness.
Okay, like a beat.
Right.
Yeah.
Your internal awareness is fundamentally rhythmic. It has a specific pattern, a speed, a natural flow to it. And distress occurs when the happenings in the outer world basically fail to adjust to that inner psychic rhythm.
Okay, that makes sense.
The author gives a very relatable example to ground this. Think about how you can feel incredibly uneasy and on edge in the company of certain people.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you feel entirely comfortable and at peace with another group.
Oh, I know that feeling so well. With some people, the conversation just flows like water, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with others, every sentence feels like you're trying to push a boulder up a steep hill. You leave the interaction just completely depleted.
Yeah, and that's a micro example of your internal rhythm either harmonizing or clashing with the external environment.
Okay, I see.
When your lifestyle and the rhythm of your external movement conform to your inner rhythm, you feel comfortable, you feel at ease.
Right.
But the modern crisis is that the broader society just lacks clear guidelines. It lacks a well-integrated philosophical base to facilitate this adjustment on a macro level.
Which leads to a really fascinating and honestly kind of alarming historical detail I noticed in our sources.
Oh, the part about the psychic disorder.
Yeah. It mentions that among educated people today, the number of individuals suffering from psychic disorders, which the source historically refers to as lunatics, is actually on the increase.
Right, and the causality assigned to this increase is what we really need to focus on here. It isn't just about stress in some vague general sense.
It's specific.
Very. The text explicitly states that this rise in psychic disorders happens because there's no adjustment in the speeds of the inner and outer worlds.
Like we're out of sync.
Exactly. Humanity has made massive intellectual and technological progress, but we lack the internal adjustment to match it. The pattern of our internal rhythm is suddenly completely disjointed from the frantic external rhythm of the objective world.
It feels like, okay, imagine trying to walk at a casual Sunday morning stroll on one of those moving airport walkways.
Oh, yeah.
But the walkway is zooming at top speed. Your feet are moving at one pace, the ground is pulling you at another, and eventually you're just going to lose your balance and wipe out.
That is a perfect analogy. The clash is inevitable, and the impact of this clash is felt way more in the psychic realm in our minds than it is in our physical bodies.
Which beautifully explains that pervasive modern feeling of just, deep mental exhaustion. Your mind is constantly running these background processes, trying to correct the rhythm between what you feel inside and what's demanded of you outside.
Right, it's exhausting.
But, okay, that raises a massive question for me. If this clash is so obvious, and if humanity has been intellectually progressing for centuries, why haven't our greatest thinkers and philosophies fixed this yet?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. We have had thousands of years of brilliant minds trying to figure out how to live well. Why are we still wiping out on the walkway?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger historical picture, past philosophies failed precisely because they just couldn't offer a sustainable, practical balance.
Okay.
They lacked what the author calls true dynamism. And these historical failures generally fall into two main groups.
Let's hear them.
First, you had theories that were purely spiritual. They focused entirely on the inner world, demanding absolute detachment.
Like abandon the world entirely.
Right. But they had zero connection to the rationality of the psychic world or the physical, logistical realities of human society. The author actually rather bluntly notes that most of these theories have just been thrown onto the garbage heap of history.
Ouch. I mean, fair enough, though. If a philosophy just tells you to sit in a cave and meditate, while completely ignoring the fact that people need to eat, build infrastructure, organize societies.
Right. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't really help the average person commuting to work on a Tuesday.
Exactly. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, you had theories that sounded incredibly fine regarding the physical realm, but they were essentially trapped in the dreamland of theory.
Dreamland of theory. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, they lacked any connection to the hard, practical realities of human nature.
Which brings up a specific type of theory. The source material critiques pretty heavily theories that promise absolute human equality.
Yes.
Because on paper, total equality sounds like the ultimate utopian goal.
All right.
Why is that categorized as a failure?
Well, because it contradicts the basic biological and physical realities of the world. The material quotes a fundamental principle here. Variety is the law of nature. There cannot be 100% equality.
Huh. Variety is the law of nature.
Right. The world is a panorama of variegated forms, speeds, and rhythms. So, a philosophy that tries to force total uniformity, it's superficial.
It's fighting reality.
Exactly. It might dazzle an onlooker for a moment with its idealism, but it ultimately collapses because it contains no actual dynamism. It just ignores the natural, necessary diversity of existence.
And dynamism really is the crucial word here. The text describes dynamism as the first and last word of human existence. If a philosophy loses that flow, that adaptability to different rhythms, it just dies.
And the author uses a brilliant metaphor for this lack of dynamism. A philosophy that loses its flow is like a stagnant pool.
Oh, right.
Without a constant moving current, a pond inevitably becomes overgrown with weeds. It turns into a health hazard. It's actually better for the local ecosystem to just fill that sort of pond with dirt than let it sit there.
I love that imagery. A stagnant philosophy just breeds problems. You can see that today in like rigid corporate cultures or hyper-partisan online communities.
Oh, absolutely.
When new ideas aren't allowed to flow in, the environment just turns toxic.
Yeah, and the text explicitly states that these stagnant philosophies flung humanity into the quagmire of dogmatism. They became the breeding ground for the mosquitoes of dogma.
Mosquitoes of dogma.
Yeah. Instead of contributing to human welfare, they did humanity a massive disservice by trapping people in these rigid, unmoving thought structures that just bite anyone who steps out of line.
Okay, so if those past philosophies are essentially mosquito-filled stagnant pools, what are the stagnant ponds we're swimming in today? Because we clearly still have dogmas.
We definitely do.
Let's look at the frameworks that are currently trapping us, which the material calls narrow-minded sentiments.
Right. So the first major track is geo-sentiment. This is the sentiment that grows out of an exclusive love for the indigenous soil of a specific country.
Okay.
It gives birth to things like geo-patriotism, geo-economics, and even geo-religion.
So basically confining your love, your loyalty, and your empathy strictly to the geographical borders you just happen to be born within. If you're listening to this on your commute right now, think about how often the news cycle relies on geo-sentiment. I mean, trade wars, border disputes,
Right.
the whole idea that the economic success of someone across an invisible line is somehow an automatic threat to you.
And the fundamental problem with geo-sentiment is that it attempts to keep humanity confined. The innermost natural desire of human consciousness is actually to expand maximally in all directions.
You'll grow.
Yes. So when you force an expansive inner desire into a narrow geopolitical box, an immense psychological imbalance occurs. This geo-sentiment has historically caused enormous harm.
Bloodshed, wars.
Exactly. Degrading human beings and polluting our higher potentials with constant conflict.
But society eventually realizes geo-sentiment is too narrow, so they try to graduate to the next level.
Right.
Socio-sentiment.
Right. Socio-sentiment expands the boundary slightly, but it maintains the wall. Instead of confining your loyalty to a geographical territory, you extend it to a particular social group. You prioritize the well-being of your specific demographic, religion, or class. But crucially, you do this to the exclusion of all other groups.
Which means the danger is still entirely present. You are still drawing a line in the sand. You're just drawing it around a demographic identity instead of a national border.
Exactly.
And we see this constantly on social media, right? Echo chambers, where empathy is exclusively reserved for people who share your exact worldview.
And while socio-sentiment might seem a tiny bit broader than geo-sentiment, it's fundamentally flawed. When you only care about your in-group, you don't hesitate to violate the interests and natural growth of out-groups.
Yeah.
Socio-sentiment has caused massive bloodshed and thrown humanity into what the author calls the dark dungeons of petty dogmas. It stops humanity's movement from being a broad, flowing river and turns it right back into that stagnant pool.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though, because as a listener, you might be thinking, okay, loving just my country is too narrow. Loving just my social group is too narrow. So the answer must be humanism, right?
That's the logical next step for most people.
Right. Loving all of humanity without borders or demographics, that has to be the ultimate gold standard. But the material pushes back incredibly hard on that assumption.
It does. And this raises a deeply uncomfortable question about the limits of our empathy. The text provides a remarkably sharp critique of human sentiment. It exposes the inherent hypocrisy of humanism when it's strictly limited to human beings alone.
The examples used to illustrate this are so vivid. It talks about eloquent historical speakers who would stand up and shed copious tears for suffering humanity, delivering these incredibly moving, progressive speeches.
Yes, very passionate.
And then, right after stepping off the podium, they would sit down comfortably at a dinner table and feast on a delicious meal of hilsa and kaimak fish.
Right. They weep for humanity, but consume those fish as if the creatures had not suffered pain and death to become their meal.
Yeah.
The human sentiment expressly violates the interests of non-human creatures. But the proponents of strict humanism find absolutely nothing wrong with it because the fish, well, they fall outside their boundary of empathy.
There is another wild example in there, too. A story about a great, revered saint who lived only on locusts dipped in honey.
Right. The saint is revered by his followers for his extreme asceticism and his detachment from worldly luxury.
Right, he's seen as so holy.
Exactly. Yet he's completely oblivious to the fact that those little locusts also had a vital life force throbbing inside them. He ignored the rhythm of life in those insects just to maintain his own perceived purity.
Now, the text does acknowledge rationality here, right? And it notes the ancient reality that living creatures are the food for other living beings, and that even vegetables have living cells. The critique isn't a simplistic demand that humans stop eating entirely.
No, not at all.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Humanism has driven almost every major human rights advancement in modern history. It feels incredibly harsh to call it hypocritical just because we eat fish. Isn't prioritizing human welfare over insect welfare just a basic biological imperative? I mean, it's survival, isn't it?
Well, it is a biological imperative, yes. But the issue is the philosophical boundary we draw. When humanism dictates that only humans possess a rhythm worth respecting, it creates this artificial separation between humanity and the rest of the cosmos.
Ah, I see.
If your philosophy allows you to needlessly destroy or exploit the environment, animals, or ecosystems simply because they aren't human, you're still operating from a narrow sentiment.
You're still out of sync.
Exactly. You're still out of sync with the broader reality of the universe.
So if humanism still violates the interests of non-human creatures and keeps our inner rhythm disconnected from the larger ecosystem, how do we break out of this? How do we finally achieve that psychic equilibrium we talked about at the beginning?
This is where we arrive at the core solution. To break out of these narrow sentiments, we have to utilize what the author calls humanity's highest, most valuable treasure, devotional sentiment.
Devotional sentiment. The text describes this as a tender inner asset. It's this deep, precious element of devotion and love within the human heart.
Yes.
But because it's so tender, it needs protection, right? From the harsh onslaughts of materialism and narrow dogmas.
Think of a small, newly sprouted plant in a really busy courtyard.
Right.
If you leave it out in the open without any barrier, it will inevitably get trampled by people rushing past. You have to build a protective fence around it, a guardrail to let it grow. And the text asks, what is this protective fence for our tender devotional sentiment?
The fence is a proper dynamic philosophy, and that philosophy is Neohumanism.
Yes, Neohumanism. It's the framework that establishes the correct harmony between the inner spiritual world and the outer material world.
How does it do that?
It works by taking that human sentiment, that concern for the vital rhythm in others, and extending it to include all created beings of this universe, animate and inanimate.
So it elevates humanism to universalism.
Exactly.
It's not just about loving humans, it's about expanding your inner love to recognize the value in everything.
Yeah.
The material cites this beautiful concept from the Vishvapuraja, stating that this manifested universe is the expression of a latent, all-pervading entity.
Right.
Therefore, a wise person should look upon everything as their own from an integral viewpoint. Let me try an analogy here to synthesize this.
Go for it.
Imagine you're taking care of a garden. If you operate on a narrow sentiment, let's say rose sentiment, you only water and care for the roses.
Okay.
You ignore the health of the soil, you exterminate the earthworms, you try to block the rain if it doesn't fall exactly when you want. Eventually, the roses die anyway, because you fail to recognize that the soil, the worms, the rain, and the roses are all part of the exact same vital ecosystem. You cannot just love the parts that look like you or serve your immediate aesthetic preference. You have to care for the whole system to keep the garden alive.
That analogy captures the essence perfectly. Neohumanism is the recognition that you are an integrated part of an interconnected ecosystem of consciousness.
Right.
Now, the philosophy sounds beautiful in theory, but the crucial part of this material is the daily application. How do you actually apply this to align your internal rhythm with external reality?
Right, because if this is just a nice idea we think about during a deep dive, it goes right back to being that stagnant dreamland of theory we critiqued earlier. So what is the actual daily habit?
The author outlines a very specific technique of realization. It's called maintaining a subjective approach through objective adjustment.
Okay, wait. I understand the idea of seeing everything as connected, but mechanically, how does a subjective approach through objective adjustment actually work?
Let's break it down.
Let's ground this. How does looking at the guy aggressively cutting me off in traffic and thinking he is supreme consciousness actually stop my blood pressure from spiking? Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Let's look at those two terms. The subjective approach is your internal psycho-spiritual movement. It's your mind actively moving toward a broader understanding of supreme consciousness.
Okay.
The objective adjustment is how you practically interact with the physical world, doing your job, paying your bills, driving in traffic.
So living in the real world, but with a different internal lens.
Yes. And mechanically, the reason your blood pressure spikes when you get cut off in traffic is because your ego perceives a separation and a threat. You view the other driver as an isolated, hostile object acting against your personal rhythm.
Right, he's in my way, he's messing up my day.
Exactly. The friction is born from that perceived separation. The daily habit of neohumanism is a profound, continuous perceptual shift. It's keeping the realization alive in your heart that all molecules, atoms, electrons, protons, and positrons, including the ones making up that aggressive driver and his car, are veritable expressions of the exact same supreme consciousness that makes up you.
Wow. So by recognizing the underlying unity in the chaos, the friction just disappears. You aren't fighting the rhythm of the world anymore.
Exactly.
You realize that the traffic, the driver, and your reaction are all part of the same massive chaotic ecosystem. The ego's need to fight drops because you aren't resisting reality. You're recognizing your place within it.
And those who remember this reality constantly are described as the real devotees. The practice is elevating this from just an intellectual thought exercise to a true devotional mission.
It's a way of living.
Yes, you advance psycho-spiritually on the inside while simultaneously establishing a social structure based on universalism on the outside. You adjust to the objective world without losing your subjective peace.
It closes that exhausting gap between the speed of your mind and the speed of the world.
Furthermore, the text issues a really stark warning about what happens if we fail to adopt this mindset. Without this constant expansive realization, our inner psycho-spiritual rhythms will inevitably crash against those narrow geo-sentiments and socio-sentiments. We will retreat right back into our tribal echo chambers, and that class will have a disastrous, destructive effect on society.
It truly frames this as an issue of ultimate survival, not just a self-help trick for reducing stress.
Absolutely. The material concludes by stating that this devotional wealth must be preserved, otherwise humanity loses its most valuable possession. The realization of Neohumanism is the ultimate appeal to protect our inner vitality from total destruction. It's how we save ourselves from the agony of total loss amidst the immense pressures of modern external circumstances.
That is incredibly powerful. Let's quickly recap the journey we just took. We started with that modern, exhausting feeling of psychic distress, that visceral sense of being totally out of sync with the velocity of the world. We explored how past philosophies failed us by either ignoring practical reality or ignoring our spiritual needs, turning into those stagnant, mosquito-filled pools.
Yeah, the dreamlands and garbage heaps.
Exactly. We then examined how narrow mindsets like geopatriotism, socio-sentiment, and even the hypocrisy of strict humanism trap us by drawing arbitrary lines around our empathy.
And finally, we discovered the neo-humanist approach. The protective fence.
Yes, the daily practice of recognizing the exact same supreme consciousness in every single atom and creature, which mechanically lowers our friction with the world, restores our inner rhythm, and brings us back into a state of dynamic balance.
It really is a profound shift from seeing the world as a chaotic collection of separate, clashing objects to experiencing it as a unified, rhythmic expression of a single consciousness.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back out into your day. Think about your immediate surroundings right now.
Just look around you.
Yeah. If you truly, deeply internalized that every single molecule around you, from the plastic in the coffee cup sitting on your desk, to the stray dog walking down the corner, to the person who's about to send you a really frustrating email, is an expression of the exact same supreme consciousness that resides within you. How would that fundamentally change the very next action you take today?
It completely reframes every interaction from one of conflict to one of true connection.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
Keep questioning those boundaries, keep expanding your perspective, and the next time you feel like you are wiping out on that moving walkway of modern life, remember to check your inner rhythm. We will catch you on the next one.